The parts are here for the R65 rear suspension. So we got our shock. This is about 9.5, maybe 9 3/4 inches long, adjustable between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds. I also made up a couple of little brackets to be able to mount it not only to our hoop, but also to the mounting solution I'll show you guys here in just a second. Then I also got this little guy. So while looking over this design a little bit more off camera, and also based on a comment one of you guys left from the last video, I realized that if I weld this all in solid, I actually lose the ability to separate my rear diff from the rest of the swing arm. That's just not a good idea. It limits us as far as serviceability, upgrades down the future. It's just not a good look to remove that functionality. So what I've decided to do is this little piece right here is going to be incorporated into the design. So what this does is it's designed to go right into a straight piece of tube. It allows you to remove the little bolt and then separate the two sections. Put them back together, they're machined to be perfectly concentric. Put the bolt back in, and now that's one solid piece again. So the idea there is that we incorporate that piece into this front support tube. So we remove that bolt, this nut, unbolt this piece, and then this whole swing arm section will be completely removable. We retain all of the functionality of being able to service and remove our rear diff. So what I want to move on to now is tacking all of this into place. So for the version 1 of this design, I'm going to utilize this center backbone of the frame. It ends at a flat piece right here. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but what I did is I made up a little plate that we're going to weld in right at the back of that. So that's going to sit there. That's going to give us a nice flat mounting point that has all the forces going right down the center line of the frame. It's going to be very, very strong. I have my little shock set up with some temporary hardware. So the front of the shock is going to mount to that plate just like this. We're going to weld on those tabs, give us space to get a bolt in and out, test all that, make sure all the serviceability stays the way we want it to. And then down here, these two pieces will mount up just like that. I was about to tack in our front support tube, but I really need to add that disconnect first. Thinking through it a little bit, it'll be easier for me to remove material from this than to add it. So what I'm going to do is actually just slice it in half, add our disconnect, which is effectively going to add about 1 inch of height. And we're going to see what that geometry looks like. If that's a little bit too high, then we can just go through and kind of trim off as much as we need to get the angle we want. It'll be much easier to go about it that way than needing to add, an extra inch of tube. So everything is officially tacked into place. I also went ahead and threw on some temporary hardware down at our bottom mounts, and we are ready to actually test this thing. Ideally it settles, I don't know, 1 inch or 2 and not much more than that. There's a possibility this thing just goes straight to the tire. Coming down. Also a little cautious that none of these tacks break and just shoot off. No crazy noises. Okay. Officially holding the weight. Let this loose. Okay. Okay. So far so good. Okay. I can move it. I can see the shock compressing, but not too much. This is going well. Got it adjusted down to the softest setting. Also moved the jack out of the way to make sure that doesn't affect anything here. Okay. I mean, that is doing what it's supposed to do. And the beauty of that too is as we add more weight, obviously gas tank, full rider, all that stuff on here, we have quite a few settings to bump up the stiffness. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't too stiff in its softest form, and I don't think it is. Look at that. Shocking. I got the bike back up in the air and went ahead and supported it in the center and pulled off the shock. What I want to do is double check that this mounting point right here never goes down, for lack of a better word, throughout the travel of this whole thing. What I'm trying to avoid here, and I mentioned this in the previous video, is if the shock's mounted like this, and then our mount or our swing arm kind of goes like that, what I don't ever want it to do is compress enough to where it then goes like this. Does that make sense? So as long as this stays on an upward arc, then there's no way physically for this thing to kind of go the opposite direction we want it to. So ideally, oh yeah, so it only goes higher, and then we're touching the subframe right there. Further away is not going to be an issue because the shock's going to be extending at that point. So I think we're going to be totally fine. Last thing to test is that this thing is in fact removable. So we just need to unbolt. I already did that side. Take my Allen. Come in here. And this should come up. Boom. That'll make it much easier to finish weld all of that too. My spacer fell out, but comes back. Slide that over. It slides in. And then bolts back through there. Nice! Moving right along, there's only one step left I want to do to the frame before we disassemble everything, and that is going to be removing these rear passenger foot peg mounts. I talked about it in the last video. A lot of you guys left comments saying, hey, you're probably never going to have a passenger on this bike, so go ahead and chop them off. That's what we're going to do. This one will be easy. I can just chop it right off. We'll worry about finishing it up and making it look clean a little bit later. The other side, I'm going to have to be a bit selective about where I cut. Because the rear brake lever actually mounts to the bottom of that piece. So I'll probably just cut off a big chunk of it and then we'll finalize that when everything's disassembled. Now that those passenger foot peg mounts are cut off, I want to move on to a couple of small projects that are going to be mounted directly to the frame before I can totally strip this thing down. So that's going to be a mount for our battery, a mount for our Moto Gadget M unit, and then up here, something I already kind of knocked out off camera was a mount for our RIX voltage regulator rectifier. So all of these components, I have a M-Lock, a Moto Gadget Motoscope Mini, some switches and everything are all from our buddies at Revival Cycles. So I will throw a link in the description below. All of this stuff came from them. And before any of you ask, yes, there is enough clearance under the gas tank. Part of the reason why I picked that Honda gas tank is because it has a big cavity in the center. So we can hide all of these components under here and they're going to be completely invisible from the outside of the bike. For the voltage regulator rectifier, all I did was make a little bracket with a piece of straight bar, rounded the ends, bolted the regulator right up here. That's going to be nice, get plenty of airflow, and it tucks in nicely. It's going to disappear. So that's why I didn't bother showing it. It's extremely simple. So for the battery, originally I was going down this path of get a piece of angle iron, cut it up, build a little tray for it to sit in. We'd weld this to the frame. The more I worked on this, the more I hated it. This is how I used to build stuff. I want to improve my skills and get a little bit higher end and make stuff a little bit more custom than that. So what I'm going to attempt to do, and how it turns out is yet to be determined, is I have a couple of big hunks of aluminum. I'm going to set this up in the mill, and I'm going to try and mill out a pocket for our battery to sit on, and then we'll figure out some way to kind of put some ears on there that we can thread and have basically a piece that goes on top of the battery, a pocket for the battery to sit in, and some way to connect the two. And then we will make this piece probably bolt on and off from the frame, just so it could be removed if we wanted to change battery sizes or upgrade or whatever in the future. I just want to press my skills a little bit, use some of these giant machines I have laying around. So I used a little app on my phone. Actually show you guys. It's pretty cool. It is called FS Wizard. It's not sponsored or anything. I'm not even sure where I found it. But I can put in that I'm cutting aluminum. I'm cutting it with an end mill that has 2 flutes. the diameter of the end mill, all that stuff, and it tells me that I should be shooting for right around 2,900 RPMs. So I have my machine set up for 2720, but I know that this thing doesn't run exactly to what the nameplate says. So I'm going to turn it on and we're going to check the RPM real quick and see how far off we are. That's an important thing to note too. I forgot that my machine, when I put it in high gear, spins in reverse. So we're gonna want to turn this thing on opposite of how we normally would. Otherwise I'll be running this thing backwards and we'll burn it up in a second. So that's very close to the RPM we're looking for. One day I'll put a variable frequency drive on this machine so I could just dial up the frequency and hit it exactly what it wants. Making some really good progress here. So you saw me mill out that pocket and then hopefully the GoPro caught. I use the end mill to kind of plunge cut these 4 little radius right here just so they're nice and uniform. Then I just took my calipers and scribed an 1/8 inch line around the entire perimeter, used the bandsaw to cut it into this shape, and shaped it a little bit more on the belt sander. So what I need to do now is I want to remove a little bit more of the kind of bulk of this thing. I already removed 100 thousandths off the bottom. I'm gonna go with at least another one, maybe another 200 thousandths off of this thickness, just because we really don't need it to be this bulky. Once that's done, I'm gonna run what's called a ball end mill, which is what this guy is right here. And that's gonna give us a nice radius. So I'm gonna run that ball end mill straight down the center line of this, and it'll give us a little cup right in the center. It'll sit nicely on our frame. Time for a little test on the bike. So you can see what the ball end mill did. I actually ended up running one pass through the center and then bringing it over an 1/8 inch in each direction and running a path to make it just a little bit wider. It'll be up towards the front of the frame, but there's some little tabs I need to remove, but I mean, that's pretty sweet. Sits on there real nice. Battery in there. Heck yeah. I mean, that's pretty sweet. I'm excited about that. Compare version 1 to version 2. I'm glad I decided to just push my limits a little bit and try and learn something new. I'm pretty stoked on how this is turning out. So what I still need to do is punch 2 holes through each ear and then grab some lunch. And when we come back from lunch, we're gonna move on to making that top piece so that it'll suck this down and make it nice and secure. So I went ahead and knocked out the top piece off camera using the exact same techniques you guys just saw. So this fits very snug right on the top of the battery, just like that, on that little lip. And of course, like we saw earlier, the bottom of the battery will sit in there. That'll sit on the frame. And then I don't have bolts quite long enough, but a bolt will go through that, through the bottom hole, and then into a riv nut, which is just basically a nut that will be in the top of the frame. And then that'll be very secure. You know, it's kind of silly to spend this much time on a battery mount that no one will see because it's under the gas tank, but the more I practice building stuff like this that you can't see, the better the stuff's gonna look that you can. For the M unit, I am just gonna go with a super simple 2 little metal tabs just coming right off of the frame, because these lugs actually act as the ground for the M unit, and I wanted to have a really good chassis ground. We've made some really good progress on the R65 in this video, guys. So the rear suspension, pretty much all ready to go. I do need to disassemble it all and finish weld it, of course. The battery hold down is done, so I still need to do the 2 tabs for the M unit, but the regulator rectifier is mounted. I don't think there's any other frame modifications I'm gonna need to do. So in the next video, you're most likely gonna see me pull the engine back out, finish weld everything, paint the frame, and kind of get this thing ready for assembly. Then we have a couple of actually pretty interesting videos coming up. So I'm working on a video where I do some machining and repair and brazing and stuff on some carburetors. Kind of show you guys how that process is working. I'm figuring it out myself, so I'll show you when I come up with it. I also have a video I want to make about my CB500. I'm going to get that thing back out on the road. I'm also going to make like a kind of diagnostic video, a little more technical video on that as well. So tons of good content coming up on the channel very soon. I appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'll see you on the next one.